Welcome to the Healthy Reasonings podcast with Dr. Andre. You are now listening to your number one source for clear, unfiltered conversations about your health and wellness. Join us every Tuesday for success stories, educational topics, and interviews with wellness experts from around the world. You can listen to this podcast on your computer, phone, or any other electronic device that streams podcasts, or download each episode and listen to it on the go. Let's get started with today's episode.
Well, hello there, and welcome to yet another episode of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. I might be mistaken, but I'm almost sure that today represents episode 20. And I want to thank those of you who have been along with me for this amazing journey. 20 episodes of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. I don't think I could have asked for anything better, because it has been 20 episodes of a journey with you, the both of us, establishing a clique and a tribe and a army of healthy reasoners who are allowing ourselves to evaluate carefully the world of health and wellness. And so the podcast is truly your number one podcast for clear, unfiltered information about your health and wellness. And today we're going to be giving you exactly what you asked for. I'm going to be speaking very candidly about a very specific topic, and that topic today is that of lymphoma. And before we begin, I want to give you my usual disclaimer that the advice that is going to be, or the information that is going to be released here today, is going to sound like it could be advice, but it's not. It's simply information with which you can be better armed to make decisions. However, if you need specific medical advice for your unique medical complaint, your recommendation continues to be, my recommendation to you continues to be that you need to find your own health practitioner, whether it is one that you already have or one that you have grown to trust, and ask them for advice about your unique and specific and personal medical condition. This is just intended to be information for healthy reasoners to use as part of their information gathering to help them towards making a decision within the context of being guided by a healthcare practitioner of whatever form. That was very long-winded, but it was fun. And I think it helps put me at ease to be able to speak more candidly and transparently about today's topic, which is lymphoma. 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 And as a hematologist and oncologist, by the way, I keep on hearing that I need to introduce myself, so I want to reintroduce myself. My name is Dr. Andre Williams. I am an integrative oncologist with a background and specialty training in hematology and oncology. So I am a medical doctor with specialty training in hematology, which is a study of blood, and oncology, which is a study of cancer. And my journey is detailed in episode 1 of this podcast. So if you want to hear the specific details about my qualifications and subsequent journey, please journey over to episode 1, whether now or when I'm finished speaking today, so you can be assured of the authenticity of my background and the authority I have to make some of the pronouncements I will make. Lymphoma. Lymphoma. What is lymphoma? Well, it is simply a form of cancer which involves either the lymphoid tissue or lymphoid cells. And so we need to figure out what are lymphoid cells and what is lymphoid tissue. Well, for those of you who have been following and tracking with me for the past 20 episodes, you would understand that the body has very specific ways of regulating itself. And one of the things the body needs to be able to do is to process foreign objects, for example, chemicals that don't belong in the body, bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi that don't belong in the body, abnormal chemicals, anything that could potentially be harmful to the body, and also anything that's generated as waste by the body. And we are quite familiar with the concept of the bloodstream carrying different things around, but there is also a parallel channel for the transport of waste, and that channel or system of channels is known as the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is responsible for, amongst other things, the transport and processing of various types of waste within the body. And one of the ways that the lymphatic system does so is that it has several what we call processing sites. So there's lots of little canals or channels carrying liquid waste around the body. And at various points scattered across the body, there are processing areas or processing plants where the waste is processed through a specific system. And in those processing plants, it comes into contact with circulating cells from the immune system known as lymphoid cells, which will include lymphocytes and so on. You don't want to get too bogged down with that because we're going to give you a very interesting analogy shortly. So, most commonly, you will identify these lymphoid tissue areas, processing areas on your body as lymph nodes. Lymph nodes. And lymph nodes, one of the classical ways that you can imagine a lymph node is when a child has mumps and they have these swollen glands in the head and neck region. Another example is infectious mono, oftentimes is associated with enlarged lymph nodes. And for the most part, these lymph nodes become enlarged when they are actively assisting with processing excess waste. So, for example, in the setting of a viral infection, as I've mentioned before, many times you'll notice that people will have these enlarged lymph nodes. In Jamaica, we call them wax and cannon, which is a variation on wax and kernel, which I think is the original British colloquialism. And the real purpose here is to slow down the flow of the waste. And within those lymph nodes, they come into contact with various types of immune cells that can help to appropriately process the waste, absorb what needs to be absorbed, destroy what needs to be destroyed, engulf and swallow in a very real way. Some of the cells actually swallow some of the waste breakdown products. And then once the cleanup has been completed, the processed waste can then be returned to other organs or it's via the bloodstream, ultimately to the liver, is what I'm trying to say, and spleen, where they're going to be processed at a different level and ultimately prepared for expulsion from the body, excretion. I'm trying not to get too technical. It's not that I'm just avoiding giving you too much of an anatomy and physiology lecture because there's no need to do that here. Most of you are healthy reasoners and the others will be able to follow. So it's similar almost. I always like to draw this parallel with your home. And in your home, you have two different types of water pipes. You have those nice clean pipes that are carrying your water into your house. And some people put a filter on that incoming water nonetheless, which is still smart. And so nice clean water comes in So we could call that system the parallel of the bloodstream. But then at the same time, you also have a wastewater system attached to your house, and that is responsible for carrying all the water after you've washed the dishes. Other systems will ultimately carry the water after you've flushed the toilet, after you've showered, etc. And they ultimately are carried away in a different set of pipes away from the body and to various types of processing plants. So as I understand it, for example, some homes may be equipped with a septic tank of some kind, or some sort of a pit, where some of this wastewater will settle for a while and be processed in an additional way. And ultimately, as we all know, it may be transported onwards to a sewage treatment area, whatever that may look like in your community, where it's processed even further. And depending on how your city works, you may find that some of that water is ultimately recycled in various ways and used for other purposes. So we kind of have a way of understanding what this wastewater system or lymphatic system looks like, in terms of the fact that the waste is processed at a variety of different additional processing areas before ultimately being deemed fit to be passed on elsewhere for other purposes in a much more clean state. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about our usual sponsors. And as a matter of fact, before we do that, I wanted to remind you that we're not averse to having new sponsors. So you're more than welcome to send us a request if you would like to sponsor one of our programs, and you don't need to be a massive conglomerate or large Fortune 500 company. We are happy to have discussions with you regarding having your business advertised on our podcast. Anyway, let's jump into our today's sponsor.
In a world that moves too fast, it's easy to lose touch with what truly matters, your well-being. At Teshuva Wellness, we believe in a return to balance, to healing, to your best self. Our holistic approaches nurture not just your body, but also your soul. Whether you're seeking peace, energy, or a deeper connection, we're here to guide you every step of the way. Our medical experts specialize in holistic treatments for chronic diseases, ranging from autoimmune illnesses to cancer. Our treatments are safe, non-toxic, and effective. Because at Teshuva Wellness, your journey to wellness is our greatest commitment. Visit our website today at teshuvawellnessjae.com or call 1-876-787-8197. That's 1-876-787-8197. Teshuva Wellness. Return to health. Return to your best self.
Okay, we're back. And so now comes the time for the analogy, because I have formed a very unique perspective on lymphoma. And yet, even though it's a unique perspective, it does not vary much from the so-called conventional or currently accepted status quo surrounding lymphoma. So I'm going to paint a little analogy for you, and I want you to follow me as best as you can with this analogy so that we can talk a little bit about why lymphoma needs to have consistent approaches if we're going to have successful treatment of our clients. So imagine for me that there is a news report that says, hey, there is a very dangerous criminal who is holed up within the center of a community, a residential community. So he has barricaded himself in, and for whatever reason, the news report goes out and the police are called in. And we've all seen movies and there are different series on television about certain scenarios just like this. And usually the police are adequately equipped and trained to handle the situation quite easily. I want you to imagine for me, though, that this particular criminal found a way to barricade himself in so well that the initial wave or team of police that was called in had difficulty either neutralizing this person or removing him from the building within which he was barricaded. And so naturally, this initial team of police will call for backup. Now, let's say they call for backup and the first wave of backup comes. They assess the situation, they try their various techniques, and they realize, you know what? This guy is not budging. This is a very difficult one. So that first wave of backup calls for even more specialized forces. So a second wave of reinforcement comes. And unfortunately, none of these waves of law enforcement officers are able to adequately deal with the situation. Just imagine for me that this situation goes beyond, let's say, a few days. This now becomes a significant crisis, not just for the community, but for probably the entire city. And it begins to attract more attention. Now, naturally, what will begin to happen over time as more and more effort is needed and more reinforcements are required to contain this situation, eventually what's going to happen is a few things. One, the techniques that are being used to deal with the situation are probably going to become a lot more savage over time. Because now this individual is threatening and causing problems for the entire city. And it is becoming a real crisis. And so what you'll find is to a lesser or greater extent, the law enforcement officers involved in the situation will naturally be a lot more enraged than when they just came in. Tempers will begin to flare. It may be that communication is affected, but generally speaking, you can imagine the attitude and the mood of these law enforcement officers would have changed to become a lot more aggressive. And looking on and seeing how intense their approach is to the situation, how emotional they are, one could almost say that they were acting autonomously without any form of supervision. So looking on, you would see, for example, that they may have be using higher powered weapons. I don't know much about law enforcement and these things. I just watch television and movies. But their strategies may become a lot more combative. I don't know. The point I'm making is, looking on, one could easily begin to think, hey, these guys are no longer operating within the confines of the law. And so it almost might appear to be unregulated to an onlooker. Good. So we've established our analogy, I hope. I hope you're tracking with me. And I now want you to imagine that instead of the law enforcement, what we had was multiple lymphoid cells from the immune system, lymphocytes and other supporting cells, and they were trying their best to identify, tag, and destroy a foreign invader into the body. But for whatever reason, they were not being successful with the traditional and straightforward immune responses that would normally work. And so instead of it being a 1 week situation, such as it would be in, for example, chickenpox or mumps or one of those things that the childhood illnesses that we are all familiar with, that would pass on their own generally, Instead of that, what's happening is this situation, this foreign invader is persisting within the body for weeks, maybe months, maybe even years. And despite the efforts of the immune system, the lymphoid cells and the lymphoid tissue, there's just no neutralizing this threat and not getting it under control. Now, what that is referred to in conventional oncology and hematology is a concept of chronic immune stimulation. Chronic meaning long-term, meaning something that has been going on for, let's say, days or weeks or months or, God forbid, even years. There's something that has got the immune system agitated for quite some time. And the immune system, for one reason or another, has been unable to adequately contain and neutralize this threat. And for decades, within what we're going to call conventional medicine, it has been widely accepted that the majority of these lymphomas are caused by this chronic immune stimulation, or you could use the word chronic immune irritation. So, some lymphomas have been found to be in association with various viruses, such as the Epstein-Barr virus, such as the human T-cell lymphotropic virus, HTLV. Of course, in association with the human immunodeficiency virus, that's a whole slightly different discussion, with hepatitis B and C viruses and so on. Parasites have been associated. And so there has been a long-term quest to figure out the relationship between various types of infections and the presence and development of lymphoma. So when someone goes to the doctor and they have a swollen lymph node or lymph nodes or something that leads the doctor to suspect that there's a lymphoma in play here, they will often take a piece of tissue from one of the lymph nodes if possible, because they want to get a better idea what's going on within that processing plant. And if they look under the microscope and they see, going back to our analogy, 1 million soldiers in full battle gear with the most intense assault weapons as possible, which under the microscope looks a lot more like words that we can describe in biology and cellular studies, such as the state of the nuclei, how the cytoplasm of the cell looks, and so on. There are various changes that are typical of lymphoma cells. And there are also various molecular and genetic changes that take place that can be tested for in the lab. But we as healthy reasoners know that essentially what is being seen is very aggressive responses by the body's immune system in response to what is really just a foreign invader that has barricaded itself one way or another and is not susceptible or not responding to the common and conventional ways that the body would normally neutralize these things. And so I want you to imagine, therefore, that in the midst of all of this chaos and what appears to be, as we talk about cancers, when we talk about cancer cells or lymphoma cells in this case, they no longer seem to be responding to the body's regulatory signals. They seem to be under their own control. Keyword, they seem to be, and they seem to be operating without any form of inhibition. So what you then need to imagine is, let's say that one way or another there was an intervention that took place, whatever that might look like, and the criminal was convinced to come out of the house by another route, for example. Or, better yet, for whatever reason, the criminal was arrested by somebody else who negotiated with him and said, hey, this is time to stop. And the police and the first wave, second wave, third wave, let's say even the military was engaged, whatever the case may be, they get the news that, hey, listen, this criminal has been apprehended, or perhaps he has been killed, or for whatever reason, he's no longer barricaded in that house. How do you think these soldiers and police and law enforcement would respond? Naturally, there would be no more need for them to be standing at the ready. Let's say they had started to even take up battle ranks, which meant that they were invading nearby homes and forcing the residents out, saying we need this space to be able to use to form a perimeter and so on. Really, they had started to cause disruption to everyday life in that neighborhood. But then they got the news, oh, the criminal has been apprehended. No need for this military presence anymore. You're free to go. The likelihood is that they would then say, okay, thank you. Let's start packing up back our tents and so on that we had installed. Let's give back these people their homes. We no longer need to commandeer these structures. And let's try and restore order to the neighborhood. So that sounds like an ideal situation. And if it were easy to identify what was the nature of this chronic immune stimulation in the presence of lymphoma, if it were that easy, then it would be an easy open and close story in terms of treating this particular disease. But the truth is, most times it's really just not that obvious what the body is getting so excited about. And so understandably, the conventional treatment for lymphoma tends to involve, well, over the years it has always involved chemotherapy, cytotoxic chemotherapy, which meant, unfortunately, that we would administer drugs to the body that would actually destroy a lot of these lymphoma cells so that they would not start overrunning the community anymore and cause potential for other types of civil unrest and problems for the body in general. And coupled with that, in latter decades has been immunotherapy, where the scientists were cleverly able to identify specific types of antibody drugs that could be used to neutralize a specific part of the immune system without affecting other parts. So they would be able to remove the most aggressive cells without affecting nearby structures ideally. And this really, really has been a game changer for the treatment of lymphoma. However, as you could imagine, if you remove the most aggressive cells, but the original offender or cause or stimulus to the immune system has not been addressed, then the natural outcome is that law enforcement is going to be called back in because the situation is not being dealt with. And so what we've learned over time as a medical fraternity is that these immunotherapy treatments often need to be given long-term, meaning over several months. And over the past decade, we've found that there's even greater need to give them as a maintenance, meaning that because the underlying stimulus, in our analogy, the underlying criminal or lawbreaker was not dealt with or has not yet been dealt with, the signals will continue to be made for more reinforcements to come to the scene. And they're going to need to take up more space. They're going to need to do set up perimeters and all of these things and disrupt the lives of the citizens. Or in the case of the physical body, they begin to press on other structures, interfere with, for example, breathing. If there are lymph nodes in the area of the neck, can interfere with breathing and swallowing, and depending if it's close to the brain, it can cause problems. If it's close to the spinal cord, it can cause issues with nerve damage and so on. And so we've always known as a fraternity that there needed to be greater breakthrough for lymphoma. We've known that even sometimes when we give our best treatments to treat the situation, the treatments themselves cause considerable damage and side effects for the patient. And also, we've also known that in addition to the morbidity, meaning the side effects and the damage and sickness caused by the treatments themselves, there's also some amount of mortality, meaning some patients will die after receiving the treatment. Now, I think it's important for me to say here clearly that I am not against any particular treatment. I'm not one of those doctors who is outrightly against chemotherapy or against radiation or against immunotherapy. Rather, I am pro-patient, meaning I will take each patient's case at their own merit, and I want to do what's best for that particular patient. I'm also pro allowing the body to regain regulation of itself and not trying to do things that will artificially impose our own control on the body, in which case most times we cause a lot of side effects. All right, good. Let's take a quick break here, and then I'll wrap this up by telling you my own thoughts on on the future of how lymphoma should be considered. Quick break.
Healthy Reasoners. You asked and we listened. After enjoying today's episode, you can now send Dr. Andre your comments via WhatsApp. That's right, WhatsApp your comments or voice messages to us at 1-876-405-7831. Once again, that's 1-876-405-7831. We are excited to hear from you.
And we're back. So we're talking about lymphoma, and we hopefully have exhaustively explained to you the landscape as it stands now. I've made it clear that my position is not to be anti-anything. I do think it is an area that needs closer attention, and I do think that generally, as scientists, we have been on the right path by saying chronic immune stimulation is the cause. And I know we've done extensive work to try and figure out what these various agents could be that are causing the body to react in this way. However, I think somewhere along the line, we, myself included, may have gotten a little bit too caught up with identifying the molecular and genetic changes that happen in lymphoma, meaning we are so busy looking at the specific vests of the soldiers and law enforcement that are present at the scene that we've lost sight of the fact that ultimately it's not really so much about the soldiers or the police or whatever the case may be, but it's really about why they're there. So the molecular changes and the signaling pathways that we've all had to learn as medical doctors to explain what happens in lymphoma, that's all well and good. None of those are wrong. But if we can get our eyes back on the prize and identify, wait a second, but what if we were able to neutralize the threat without harming the body? And I believe that if we remain curious about this, we will see the results that we are expecting. Why do I believe this? Because I've seen it happen over and over. I've seen it happen in my own clinic. And these are anecdotal stories, so I would under no circumstances want to suggest that they are a strong strong pieces of evidence as a randomized control study or all of the different things that we know are required for a certain body of evidence. However, I'd like to submit my expert opinion, which is that I have seen patients who have come to my office with a lymphoma ranging from indolent lymphoma, meaning what we call a lazy or slow-growing type, such as a follicular lymphoma, ranging all the way up to a more aggressive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And because my approach to every patient remains the same regardless of the disease, I have sat with these patients and tried to test their bodies with them to figure out which remedies might be helpful and which chemicals or toxins might be responsible for their illness. So one of the stories I will tell quickly is of a farmer who came to see me. I've told this story before on this podcast, and the testimonial is available on the Teshuva Wellness website. But a farmer who came to see me, and his dilemma was very interesting because he had developed a large swelling of his lymph node in the area of the groin on the left side. And he had gone to the doctor, had been examined, and they identified that something was likely to be wrong. They tested the lymph node by taking a piece of it, looking at it under the microscope, confirmed that this was indeed lymphoma. It was not indolent, so it was more aggressive than a laser lymphoma would be. His dilemma when he came to see me was that at the time when he went to the hospital in the public system, they were not able to give him a date to start chemotherapy in the near future. And they had told him that the earliest date would probably be about 3 weeks away. And so he, of course, came to see me saying, "Hey, doc, is there anything you can do to help me?" And I want to be very clear that at no point did I say to this man, "Hey, don't do any chemo, don't do any immunotherapy. All you need to do is whatever." My objective was to help this gentleman to become as strong as he could be before going into the chemotherapy, because he had a large mass in his groin. And my belief is that we should try to avoid giving patients instructions that would actually put them in harm's way. So I said, here's what. Because of the uniqueness of your situation, let's work with you to get your body strengthened so that by the time you need to do chemotherapy in 3 weeks, we'll be able to have a stronger patient going in and a better likelihood of success. And so this gentleman, I tested him and found that he had elevated levels of glyphosate in his body. And I said simply to him, "Hey, let's work on getting some of this stuff out and see how you feel in 3 weeks." Put him on a regimen, and he said, "Come back and see me in 3 weeks just before you go off for your chemo." He came back in 3 weeks with a wry smile on his face. And I said, "What's going on here?" And when I examined him, there was no more swelling in his groin. Now, this was a mass that was, for those of you who are carpenters or woodworkers, this was about 5 by 3 centimeters. So not a small swelling at all. And it was totally gone. And I said to him, "Hey, what happened here?" And he said, "Well, I just did what you told me to do, and it progressively got smaller." I won't bother to go into the details of that story. Look at the Teshuva Wellness website, www.teshuvawellnessja.com. The story went very interesting right after that. But suffice it to say that 4 years later, no, more than 4 years, this is 5 or 6, coming up to 6 years later, this gentleman is still alive and doing very well. The second story is that of 2 patients I have in the clinic currently who have follicular lymphoma, which is a slower growing type, tends to be a nuisance because, like we mentioned earlier, after they receive treatment, the reinforcements tend to be called back in because the original issue was not being solved. And in both cases, I was able to identify that these patients both had evidence of parasites. In both cases, one I remember for sure having elevated eosinophils in the blood, which is one of the indicators of parasites. And in the setting of lymphoma, that's a very interesting finding. And so in both cases, we recommended very cool medication that I know about, a broad spectrum anti-parasitic. Recommended it for the patients, and it was amazing to see their lymph nodes. One of them for sure, lymph nodes significantly reduced in size, whereas it was always a problem trying to find an appropriate treatment that would keep everything down. The second is the lady who I saw recently who in the midst of me having this kind of a discussion with her, pointed out to me that indeed she had been seeing occasional evidence of worms. And so she has just started her treatment, and I'm eagerly awaiting to see what her lymph nodes will do. And separate and apart from what I've described to you in my own small clinical trial or case series, I'm in touch with doctors all around the world who have had similar experiences. The fact is that there's no debate here about whether lymphoma has at its background or at its root or foundation a chronic offending stimulus, meaning something that's just irritating the immune system over and over. And the same goes in many ways for myeloma and similar types of cancers of the lymphoid system. And my contention is that where possible, we need to start exploring more carefully where parasites and other offending organisms may be playing a role in these cases. Yes, we may still, in many cases, need to offer conventional treatment, but as you may know, conventional treatments are becoming more and more expensive, and there's always going to be that subset of patients who, for whatever reason, are unable to access conventional treatments. What are we going to do with them? So I intend to continue evaluating my patients. As soon as I get a lymphoma patient, I am eagerly trying to find what could be causing the body to react in this way in this patient, because if we are able to find that key and to neutralize the underlying threat, then the body will naturally fall into line on its own. So that's my thought on lymphoma. There's a lot more I probably could say. There are more experiences that I could share. There are aspects of metabolic typing that relate to how we treat lymphoma as well, in terms of how a lymphoma patient should eat. Generally speaking, a patient with lymphoma ought not to be encouraged to eat a specific way, but to eat another way. I'll leave it there. I'm not going to get myself in any trouble prematurely. Eventually I will, but not today. So it's been an awesome episode. I've been sharing off the cuff about my experiences and thoughts on lymphoma. I'm sure I've given you a better angle within which to view the disease. So if a family member or friend, God forbid, is diagnosed, then you have a paradigm, you have a grid within which to view what's happening to them. And remember, I still advocate for them to be properly evaluated and assessed and supervised by a trained healthcare practitioner. But I'm just saying we need to start looking more closely at this disease and what the underlying causes could be, rather than getting sidetracked with all the fancy molecular and genetic studies that have their merit, but may not necessarily be bringing us closer to finding what's at the root. So, another awesome time with you guys. Thank you to all my healthy reasoners. If any of you want to have your name or your business's name mentioned on the podcast, we are open to further discussions. The information will be available to you shortly. Thank you for your continued support, everybody. Send your questions in, send your comments in. I'm here to answer them. God bless you all.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. Remember to subscribe to this podcast so you can be updated as soon as new episodes are ready. If you have a question, send us a voice note on WhatsApp or a WhatsApp message. The WhatsApp number is 1-876-405-7831. For more information or to become a sponsor, please email wellnessdocjamaica@gmail.com. See you soon.